आज मेरे पास बिल्डिंगें हैं, प्रॉपर्टी है, बैंक बैलेंस है, बंगला है, गाड़ी है। क्या है तुम्हारे पास? मेरे पास माँ है।
Today, just having your ma or bap with you is not enough, especially when it comes to business families. It gets murkier if there is a dispute. In fact, these days it is not uncommon to see family members pitted against each other involving thousands of crores of business empires. A lot of dirty linen gets washed in public and no one is left any wiser. Matters become worse when such hostilities spill over onto the boards of listed companies. The board often has a very limited influence over the parties and tends to get divided on the opposing lines. It is the fate of the public shareholders that hangs in uncertainty. Take the latest case of the fallout between Gautam Singhania and his wife Nawaz Modi, both sitting on the board of Raymond. While a lot of water has flown under the family's bridge, with several personal aspects of the relationships becoming public, it is the shareholders of Raymond that have clearly suffered the most. The Raymond stock lost 2,500 crores of market cap since the dispute became known. And there are several such ongoing business family disputes. There's dispute between Baba Kalyani of Bharat Forge and his sister Sugandha Hiremat over control of the chemical company Haikal. There is also the dispute between Gopichand Hinduja and his nieces, who are the daughters of his late brother Shichand Hinduja. There is a fight between the extended members of the promoter Gupta family of Jagran Prakashan Group. Zoho founder Sridhar Vembu's ongoing divorce proceedings with his wife Pramila Srinivasan involves his stake sale in Zoho. The family feud in the late Gopal Raheja's construction group is between the son on one side and the two daughters on the other. And these are just to name a few. There would be many disputes simmering even as I speak. In fact, there have been at least 6 family arrangements disclosed by listed companies since July this year, as mandated by SEBI regulations. And some are getting settled too. A major family settlement that came through recently is related to the Murugappa group. It was between the daughters of late M.V. Murugappa with the rest of the family over a board seat. As part of the settlement, both daughters have agreed to be de-recognized as promoters in the Murugappa group of companies. Today's episode of the Morning Brief podcast is all about disputes in business families. Why do business families dispute? How does it typically get manifested? Who suffers? How is a settlement arrived at? What are the broad contours of such settlements? And what should boards do in such cases to protect the interest of the shareholders? To discuss these nuances, I speak to Mr. Harsh Mariwala, Chairman Marico, that evolved from being a family business to now being a leading professionally run FMCG company.
Issues like lifestyle. What kind of car is he driving? What kind of a car will I get? The spouses feel a little jealous or concerned when family member gets more prominence. At one level, they seem minor issues, but I think many times they are the triggers.
I also speak to Mr. Ketan Dalal, Managing Director, Catalyst Advisors, and one who is actively involved in family settlements.
My experience has shown that the lack of communication is probably the single biggest reason for these issues to blow up one fine day.
It is Tuesday, December 5th. From the Economic Times, I'm your host Kiran Somvanshi, and this is the Morning Brief. It's not that disputes are peculiar to Indian business families alone, but the dynamics of Indian families make our disputes peculiar compared to the others. I sit down with Mr. Harsh Mariwala, who has avoided disputes in his family business by professionalizing it. I ask him about all the dispute-causing peculiarities among Indian business families.
When family members are involved in a business, there are many complex role relationships. For example, I may have a brother or my cousin or my uncle in the business. So then there is a conflict in terms of roles, interdependence. Having said that, the disputes could be because of multiple reasons. The most important reasons, I would say, have to do with allocation of resources. Within a family, if there are different companies, or within the same company, there are different profit centers. How does the company allocate resources? Is it going to be based on the need? Is it going to be based on who generates how many profits? So the family has to sit down and arrive at on what basis resources will get allocated. There are minor issues like lifestyle. What kind of car is he driving? What kind of a car will I get? At one level, they seem minor, but I think many times they are the triggers. And the triggers occur many times at the spouse's end, not really within the family. The spouses feel little jealous, you may call it, or concerned when somebody else has a better whatever. And again, that causes issues. Then many other areas which I can think of. One is in the area of role clarity.
What sort of role clarity?
If the role is not very clear within a business, and if more than one family member is involved in day-to-day running of the business, it can lead to confusion. It can lead to duplication in terms of each one's doing other's role. It also leads to the professionals who are reporting to the family member in terms of dual reporting, and that can again cause problems. In terms of rewards, are family members going to be rewarded based on their stake in the business, or will they be rewarded on the basis of their contribution to the business, their success, or whatever they're adding value to the business? And many times these things are not clarified within the family proactively. And normally a business is started by the founder and the brothers. But when the next generation comes in, it's not the same relationship. The next generation come with a different thought process. They come with a different level of ambition. They have different educational qualification. Mostly it's higher educated. So there is a discontinuity when the next generation enters business. And again, that has its own set of issues to deal with. How the career is going to be progressed, again, will it be on merit? So to what extent meritocracy will play an important role in family? Or is it going to be based on seniority? And finally, in the area of wealth sharing, depending on the ownership stake in the business, it's assumed that you will get that much wealth. But among some family members, the expectation is that I have built a business and I have contributed extraordinary in terms of driving the success of a particular business. I should get something more. That doesn't work in family. It can lead to a dispute. The last point I want to make is the ambition levels within a family member are very, very different. So some family member may be very, very charged. Somebody may take it easy. So again, leading to a difference of opinion on how the business should be managed.
Interestingly, India Inc. till now had largely discounted the role of daughters in the businesses. But the Hinduja family dispute and the recent Murugappa group settlement has shown how family issues crop up when daughters assert their share in the business. Increasingly, daughters are yet another addition to the complex dynamic that will need to be accounted for. But it doesn't end there, as Mr. Ketan Dalal tells me. Mr. Dalal, best known as tax expert in his previous avatar at PwC India, is the managing director of Catalyst Advisors, a boutique structuring and advisory firm, and has been part of several family settlements. He tells me how every dispute is a different one.
So, Kiran, each situation is very different. No one family is like the other. No ecosystem in each family is like the other. So, for example, are we talking about a situation where there are operating businesses, or is there only assets, property, shares, etc.? That could be one category or one variable. The other variable is, Kiran, what we have found is that the larger the family, the greater the complexity. There are cousins, uncles, that obviously adds to the complexity. The third, and this is a critical point, the lack of a properly defined ownership and holding structure is often one of the reasons for this confusion, because I know that people have come and asked me that X company holds in Y is holding in Z, I am holding partly in Y. I can't even understand what I'm owning. The lack of ownership clarity is a significant issue. And the lack of, let's say, shareholding agreements, MOUs, because Indian families are normally reluctant to put things in writing, partly because nobody knows who will raise that point.
But I'm sure there are issues even when the shareholding is clear and things are in writing.
There are, let's say, two brothers are running two companies, okay? Let's say there are two listed companies. One has generated substantial value, the other has not. But the holding is, let's say, equal, or father 1/3, brother 1/3, brother 2, 1/3, or son 1 and son 2, 1/3 each. So the son one who has generated substantial value will start resenting the ownership of son two or in his company where there is substantial value generated. So he will not raise that point. He will wait for 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and then those issues start arising. That okay, but I am working so hard, I am generating the value. I have 1/3 in his company which is significantly less valuable. He has 1/3 in this company which is significantly more valuable. And I'm handling exactly the same situation in one case. So the relation is not great, but they are not fighting at least, most fortunately. So what is happening is they are at least talking. Now I'm hoping to facilitate that conversation and figure out some way of resolving this issue by segregating them and doing some kind of balancing in terms of compensating one or the other in some form. So again, that is completely customized. But if communication breaks down, that is a recipe for disaster. My experience has shown that the lack of communication is probably the single biggest reason for these issues to blow up one fine day.
And then who comes in to sort out such issues?
Sometimes it's a law firm, sometimes it's an investment banker, sometimes it's a firm like ours. See, a lot will depend on who the family is comfortable with.
Right.
And when you say family, see, as I said, in a large family, to find one or two people with whom the whole family is comfortable is often a challenge. So
Right.
ideally, if the family can resolve at least the big issues themselves, then it makes it easier for the advisory firm. Again, but the challenge is, you can easily say, this company goes to X and this company goes to Y, or this division goes to X and this division goes. But how? If it is in one company, you will suddenly say, Acha, the advisor will say, but I want to point out that there's a 55 crore stamp duty liability, for example. Now, who's going to bear that? So those kind of issues can come up also. So it's one thing to agree upon a methodology of, let's say, a separation or a semi-separation. Quite another thing to actually put it on the ground and implement it, because again, experience has taught me, Kiran, the devil is in the detail.
So which has been the trickiest settlement, so to say, for you?
See, in terms of complexity, okay, a large one which I was involved in very actively for 5 years and which had 7, 8 listed companies was a very complex one. Fortunately, I was not involved in deciding who gets what. There was a very respected gentleman from an Indian investment bank involved. But the implementation, and so we worked with that investment bank for 5 years, but the implementation and execution was mind-bogglingly complex for 4 or 5 reasons. About 24 adults between 4 families, but really 7 sub-families, because within those 4, again, there were separations. 8 or 9 listed companies. 3 holdcos holding those 9 listed companies. One single brand name, which required all sorts of agreements for, ring fencing, who will do what with that brand name and what are the consequences if something goes wrong. A large amount of property other than the shares of the listed companies. Of course, the shares of the listed company would be 85-90% of the value because the companies themselves, at least 4 or 5 of them are quite large. But the other properties were also quite large, 3,000-4,000, 5,000 crores, 20-30 bungalows here, there, somebody staying here, etc. Other complications like, there were all sorts of issues, let's say on stamp duty, properties in different places, right of access, your factory is in front of my factory, but the access is today the same. So I'll have an agreement for right of access, things like that. There were SEBI issues, there were competition commission issues, all sorts of approvals had to be taken. NCLT process was a 1-year process that had a completely different level of complexity.
The devil very much lies in the details. All this does make family disputes a complete no-go for a listed company that is governed by a board of directors and bound to make public disclosures. I asked Mr. Harsh Mariwala about the role of board in such cases.
I think the role of the board is to ensure that the company's interests are foremost and then the family's interest. So, to some extent, the board is equally responsible to ensure that the family disputes don't impact the business of the company. Now, in a larger company, larger board, it may be very difficult for the whole board to play a role. But can the board appoint 1 or 2 members on their behalf to look at family issues? Or can they suggest a way forward by appointing some outsider who can play that role? And now, luckily, there are family consultants who are available who can deal with these issues. And these issues are very complex, I've seen that some of the big consulting firms, they try to get into issues, but their understanding of Indian families and businesses is not that good. It's better that they go to somebody who understands this issue, ideally speaking, from somebody who has been in this kind of a journey in terms of family involvement, and that person can go on debriefing the board. The board can play some sort of an influential role, and board should try and resolve them.
But is it easy for the board members to have that kind of say or even have that kind of liberty to get together and appoint someone that promoters will agree with?
I think it all depends on to what extent the board is respected. If the board is collectively respected by the family, I think the board can play an important role. It all again depends on whether it's private company, public company, how big is the public company, because if the stakes are high, then it's important for the board to at least play that role and be a little bit more. If it is not being taken seriously, they have to make the family realize that this is a serious issue which needs to be resolved. And if it is not resolved, it can have a big impact on the success of the organization, the market cap. So I think the board role is to convince the family that this has to be done.
Right. Because in most listed companies that we saw having a family dispute, we only come to know the whole thing and the impact on the shares once the dispute is out.
Either those who are present, definitely those family members who are present in the board, there has to be some sensing of what is happening amongst the promoters.
An important aspect of Hindu business families is also the Hindu undivided family arrangement or HUF status entered into for tax purposes. What started off as a historical aberration to save one's income from a high tax regime ended up defining the way some Indian business families functioned. I turned to Mr. Ketan Dalal to understand if being an HUF makes matters any easier during such family settlements.
I personally believe that an HUF holding shares in a listed company, or indeed even holding, let's say, common bungalow, estate in Kodai, some tea plantation, is a recipe for disaster. Complete recipe for disaster. Because nobody knows who owns what.
It's a black hole.
It's a black hole. Because in an HUF, Kiran, you don't have an identified share. You have the eldest male member called the Karta, who theoretically, is like the patriarch of the family, but there may be 15 members and 8 of them may not respect or may not even trust the patriarch. How does that work then? Because the point is the family has become larger. Daughters have got married. Do they have a share or not? Disputable. The daughter's children, do they have another disputable? 2 judgments one side, 3 judgments another side, some opinion one side, some opinion the other side. How do you figure all this out? So I actually have this situation today where a married daughter, and she's plus 60. And her children are saying, but do I have any share or not? It's difficult to give an answer. And if I have a share, what on earth do I do to get that share? It was created in a different era. But let's say a trust. Those are things which are used sometimes for succession planning, sometimes for a potential estate duty, etc.
So have new methods and tools come in to, take care of this problem?
So recently we were involved in one case where shares of only 2 listed companies have been transferred to a trust and SEBI approval has to be taken for that, which we've done. The reason for that is that there are 2 brothers, each has 2 sons. The companies are very valuable. The relations are fantastic today. But we just wanted to create it in trust so that the trustees, which happen to be the 2 brothers and their wives themselves, at least for the next few years, they will control things. And rather than any of those 4 at some point of time getting into a dispute. The other issue is there is a fear, concern that estate duty will come in at some point given the enormous disparity in incomes and wealth. But that was another reason that if you transfer to a trust, the possibility of it escaping estate duty is higher. But it cannot be done only for estate duty purposes. Because remember one thing, when I transfer shares or some assets to a trust, even if I am the trustee, the reality of the situation, Kiran, is the asset is no longer mine. This is the reality. Even if I'm controlling that asset. And I can tell you from personal experience, it is a hell of a decision to transfer something to a trust because you know that the asset is no longer yours. You will not just do it for tax planning because there is a much larger ownership issue sitting there. The tax planning is an attachment to the larger issue and it cannot be driving the larger issue. Planning is done mainly for succession issues, for ring fencing the assets and potential fights of that asset.
Right.
So,
So letting go is not an easy thing at any time.
It is not, no?
What would be your advice to the families who are having these business interests and large families? How do they go about their settlements?
So I think there are three parts to this. The first part is you acknowledge that there is an issue. So when you have a large family with multiple businesses and God forbid unclear structures, the first thing is to acknowledge that you have a problem or you are sitting on a potential mine. Okay, first acknowledge. Then have a conversation. Now, who will initiate that conversation? Again, as I said, is completely has to be customized. So first, acknowledge. Second, thinking through and conversation. Third, getting alignment. And fourth, executing. Easier said than done. But this is the way. So unless you acknowledge the problem, it will not happen. I mean, as you saw, all sorts of permutations and combinations and easier said than done. But this is the broad sort of thing. But long before all this sort of emerges, cleaning up shareholding structures is very critical, and very often people don't understand that. So I am talking to one group and I'm saying everything is fine. I said, I know everything is fine. But start cleaning this up. You have a huge family home sitting in a company. There's no place to be in the company. You have two unrelated businesses sitting in the company. Even without a family issue, it doesn't make any sense. These are unrelated businesses. I suggest split them. Because even if you want a joint venture, forget family. You will not be able to have a joint venture because there are two unrelated businesses. But it will also help if there is a family issue. So I think the bottom line message on this one is, Kiran, cleaning up and streamlining shareholding and making logical structures aligned with business imperatives is a critical thing. And you should start acknowledging it and implementing it long before some issue arises. So that if and when it actually arises, it becomes relatively less difficult to handle.
Some very practical advice for scores of family businesses on how to make your business dispute-proof. And it only reinforces the role of board in succession planning, as Mr. Mariwala tells me.
Yeah, I think the role of the board is to look at succession planning, and not only at the top level, but one level lower also, because these are the people who are going to impact the organizational performance. And succession could be because of various reasons. One is if there is an accident, God forbid something doesn't happen like that. Number two, if a CEO is in place for, they say, 10, 15 years, then you need some fresh blood to come in. So there could be a need for a succession because of that reason, It could be because of age. That, okay, one is getting along and there is no other. So from the point of view of perpetuity, long-term continuity, there has to be some succession plan.
Taking stock of the situation, putting it all down in writing, simplifying the business structure, role clarity, and succession planning. All these are uncomfortable topics to discuss for a large business family in India. But with a rising number of members of the family wanting to assert themselves and seek their rights to the common pot of money, these issues are going to be inevitable. Today, family patriarchs are living longer and remain interested in the business even as the youngsters join it and want to hold the reins. Rising valuations mean that daughters and their families do not necessarily want to forego their stake in the business. So, setting up a dispute redressal mechanism becomes as important as doing business. And the role of board cannot be overemphasized here. After all, the Raymond board did appoint a senior independent legal counsel to act as an advisor in case of the Singhania family dispute. And the move promptly arrested the 20% fall in stock valuations that had occurred over the preceding 2 weeks. So all in all, disputes cannot be eliminated, but their potential sources can be identified early and they can be efficiently contained to arrive at mutually acceptable solutions. So that's it for today. This is Kiran Somanchi from the Economic Times, and you were listening all about Indian business family disputes only on the Morning Brief. A special thank you to Mr. Harsh Mariwala and Mr. Ketan Dalal for sharing their amazing insights. My colleague Vinay Joshi produced the episode and Rajas Nayak worked up the sound magic. TMB's executive producers are Anupriya Nair, Anirban Chaudhary and Arijit Burman. Thank you for listening, and if you like this episode, do spread the word. A new episode of the Morning Brief podcast drops every Tuesday, Thursday and Friday. Don't miss it. It streams on all audio platforms like Amazon Prime Music, Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts. And and of course, ET's own audio platform, ET Play. Have a wonderful week ahead. All clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.